I have the pleasure of welcoming everyone to this afternoon's Green Leasing Basics for Retail webinar. If you don't know me already, my name is Erin Hyatt. I am Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility for the Retail Industry Leaders Association, so a trade association for the largest retailers in the US. I'm kicking us off today just nominally, but want to put out a big thank you and very excited to be collaborating on today's webinar with, of course, Institute for Market Transformation, who will be guiding us through the core of our content, and then our friends over at the National Retail Federation and ICSC, who you'll be hearing from in just a moment as we facilitate through today's webinar. So we've got great content, good intro information, live polls, a Q&A spotlighting a retailer success story. So really encourage you all to engage throughout, ask your questions, and really get out of this event what you need. So with that, it's my pleasure to pass it over to Abby at ICSC next.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, it's Abby at ICSC. For those who might be unfamiliar with ICSC, we are the trade association for owners and developers primarily, though we do have our tenant mix as well as members. I've been here at ICSC non-continuously for about 10 years. I had a 2.5-year stint with URW, and I should say hello because I see that we have some former colleagues from URW on the line, and I hope you enjoyed the photo of the Oculus that brought you into this webinar. I'm here in the DC office and lead the ICSC ESG committee. Feel free to shoot me a chat if that's something you're interested in getting involved in. I am kicking it over to Marla Thalheimer with IMT.
Thanks so much, Abby and Erin, and Scott's here as well from NRF. He'll say a couple of words at the end, but I'm Marla Thalheimer from the Institute for Market Transformation. So happy to be here with you all today, talking about one of my favorite subjects, green leasing. So quickly, here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about some of the market drivers contributing to the need for an updated lease. Then we're going to go through some of the basics of green leasing, including some best practices as a place to start. And then I'm super excited that we'll have a special guest. So Megan Runyon from Ulta will be joining me to talk about their experience with green leasing. So I know you're all going to love that. And then we're going to have some Q&A time so we can hear from you. And then we'll close it out with some key takeaways and some additional resources. I know we asked some questions when you guys registered, so thank you for those of you who provided any of that information. Many of you said you did want to get some of the basics for green leasing and best practices, so that's what we're going to try to cover for you today. Just a couple of logistics. So as some of you heard a bunch of logistics already, we have Ella who's working on our chat room and the Q&A. We absolutely want to hear from you and take your questions. So please drop any questions along the way into the Q&A. We may try to address some of them as we go, but then we'll definitely get to as many as we can during the Q&A portion. So use that Q&A and chat for sure. Okay, and just quickly, in case you're not familiar with IMT, we're a national nonprofit focused on driving demand for high-performance buildings, which we define as buildings that are healthy, efficient, resilient, and equitable. We really believe that buildings have the ability to positively transform the physical, social, and economic well-being. So we really work closely across various industries with the government, with local communities, with organizations like the retail orgs that are here today, and really just working with the real estate industry as a whole to help drive demand for high performance buildings through education, best practices, and also building policy. So as we kick it off here, we're going to start with the polling question so we can figure out who's in our Zoom room today. So if we can bring that polling question up, we're going to take a second to answer. Not seeing a polling question. There it is. Here we go. Let us know what side that you're on. We wanted to see if there was tenants and owners. So that's great. Awesome. Looks like we have a pretty good mix here. Just give it another second. All right, awesome. It looks like we have mostly tenants at 42%, but we also have some people on the owner side, 35%, which is awesome. And then other, which I'm assuming maybe like some vendors and nonprofits, that kind of thing. So that's great. Thank you so much. That helps us sort of formulate my comments here. So, all right. Now, moving on. Going to talk a little bit about the market drivers that are currently shifting the way both landlords and tenants do business and how we make business decisions. We've been seeing this for a little while. I think some of these things started pre-COVID, and then post-COVID, it's just like they've ramped up very quickly. We're seeing increased climate-related disasters that are happening on a regular basis. And because of this, we're seeing skyrocketing insurance costs. Which could be a whole webinar on its own, but we're not going to go there. It's also making energy costs very unpredictable. There's also related to energy, there's like a push towards electrification and elimination of natural gas, which is super interesting. Many companies, and I know you all are seeing it on the retail side, are seeing increased demand from customers. More and more people want to do business with responsible companies. There's an increase from investors who want to see companies' environmental disclosures and commitments to aggressive carbon reduction goals. There's a growing list of ESG and climate disclosure requirements, such as the pending SEC climate disclosures. And some of you are probably, because I know a lot of you are global companies, you may also be impacted by this on a global scale. So I know like one example is SFDR, which is in Europe. Even if you don't have any properties directly affected by that, if you have a European investor, they could be asking you to still be SFDR compliant. So it's a lot, right? It's a lot to keep up with. But it's also pushing, right? There's a tide that's pushing everything towards being very cognizant of carbon and accounting and scope 3 emissions and all of those kind of things. There's also an evolving trend across the country for building performance standards in an effort to reduce the carbon emissions of the built environment. So I'm going to show some of our famous IMT maps. You may be familiar with these, but if you're not familiar with the maps, I highly encourage you to go to the IMT website where we have these maps available, and we try to keep them updated as soon as there's any kind of a change. So this map specifically, these are all the jurisdictions that have some kind of building related policy related to benchmarking and what we call beyond, which is maybe like a tune-up or an audit requirement. So there's a pretty good amount of jurisdictions that do have a benchmarking requirement, which is really a first step, right? It's the jurisdictions need to have data. Because if they're going to set a carbon goal, they need to understand like what's their baseline for their jurisdiction and for their area, so they know how they need to improve. So then, in addition to the benchmarking policies, this is the map for the current building performance standards. Now, building performance standards, meaning there'll be some type of limit to the amount of energy or carbon that can be used in a specific building in these jurisdictions. So, there can be some risk there. There can be risk of non-compliance, maybe a fee or a fine. And in some places, they can be pretty hefty. People are probably familiar with Local Law 97 in New York and Bordeaux in Boston. Those have gotten a lot of chatter, but these are the ones that are established currently. But the real map that you need to plug into is the National BPS Coalition. So as you can tell, there's a big difference between the last map and this map. And this is the list of growing cities, counties, states that are committing to implement building performance policies across the US by Earth Day 2024. So we're going to see a lot more policy coming down the pike. And this list continues to grow. So we have a policy team that works a lot with these jurisdictions and cities. to try to help them set up policies based on our model law, which the industry of the real estate industry has weighed in on. And so, we can just tell you that this is not going away and it's growing. So this is a really great map, again, for you to plug into, because if you have locations in any of these areas, you may be subject in some way to a building performance standard. Okay, so what does all this have to do with the lease, right? We're here today to talk about the lease. So the lease is the critical tool in the life of the real estate asset, right? It sets the stage for how your business is going to interact with the building. So it's very important that you use the lease to mitigate the risk of any financial risk from noncompliance, say for a BPS policy, or if the building doesn't reflect your goals that you've publicly stated or your brand. Right, you need to have those things that will help you meet your goals and to help you set the tone that you want for your brand. So those things need to be in the lease. So before we dig too much into the basics, we're going to go there in just a second. When you guys registered, you answered. Some of you were able to answer a little survey that we did. And I want to share those results with you because I feel like they're super interesting. And by the way, it's not too late. We can, I think we're going to put the link to this survey into the chat if you would like to still fill it out. But just a couple of the results, super interesting. And this may reflect some of our audience today, but of those who registered, the majority of people were in ESG or sustainability, but we did have some other operation and real estate folks. And how involved are you in the negotiating of leases? So it looks like we're kind of half and half on input to significant input to no input at all. So hopefully over time we can see the no input section move, because it's really good to know, we're kind of 50-50, and this is a key area. How familiar is your company with green leasing? So again, this is very interesting. We have about 25% that were either had participated in green lease leaders or one participated or won green lease leaders, 42% that have explored, and 33% have not done anything. So love that we've got a lot exploring for sure. And then I think this is a good one. Do your current leases for both retail and your office space support your ESG goals? It's not too far from half, but we have a lot, a little over half that say no, that they do not. And that's one of the reasons why we're having this discussion today. Again, both from the landlord and tenant side. We want your leases, again, whether you're a landlord or tenant, it doesn't matter. If you have ESG goals, your leases on both sides should be able to reflect your goals. Okay, so before we dig into the basics, we're going to do our just our second polling question real quick. Because I want to see who's in the room and if it kind of ties to what we were just looking at. So give us your status related to green leasing. I'm a green lease leader. I'm all about this. I know what I'm doing. You've started, you got some provisions, or maybe you're just thinking about, or if you're I don't even know what you're talking about, which is why I'm here today. Give it just a moment. Okay, that's good. It looks like the majority, we've got about 43% that are thinking about it but have not started. And we've got about 30% who have started, and about 26% that are all about it and are green lease leader. That's awesome. And that is fairly consistent with what we were saying. So that's great. All right. Thank you for that. Now let's jump in. What is a green lease? The leasing process can oftentimes be, pretty much always, it's very adversarial, right? It's what we need. It's all about what we need. But one of the key components of a high performance or green lease is really to work together, and particularly in these key areas, to create a collaborative agreement between landlord and tenant. This is just a little bit of a different, spin on the lease negotiation. instead of like, hey, we want all the things, we get everything, you get nothing. It's like, maybe there's still some of that, but on these related to energy, related to efficiency, related to ESG goals, let's work together, because being able to create a win-win outcome is how you're going to be most successful here. So for example, right, if you are a tenant, if your HVAC system is not great, but per your lease, it's on you to replace, but you don't own the building. So, it's hard to be motivated to spend that kind of money when you don't own the building. But your landlord, it's hard for them to want to spend the money. This is called the split incentive, right? And it's a very common problem. And in this scenario, nothing gets done, right? The buildings just keep getting more inefficient over time. The tenants can continue to pay too much in utility cost. The landlord doesn't win. Like, there's just no win-win when you sort of reach that split incentive stalemate. So this is why this concept is important, because if tenants and landlords can work together to figure out how you can get a better building system while driving energy savings or improved lighting or improved indoor air quality, right, where like the landlord can help invest and get paid back for the measure, while the tenant gets to see a little bit of savings right away, and it's amortized over time. Then after it's paid off, then they see a significant savings. Like, there's different ways that, again, tenants and landlords can work together to try to make some progress here. So, I mean, if there's any kind of a measure that, as a tenant or as a landlord that you really want to do in your space, like, again, from both sides, be open to those conversations and see if you could come up with a viable solution that does work for everybody. I mean, just think of, what could be accomplished if we approached it in that manner. Every tenant and landlord obviously is different and have different things that are important to them, but you don't know what's possible, at least until you open the door for the conversation. All right, so let's talk about the main key parameters that you would see in a green lease. So it's really these basic things of outlining priorities of both parties. Well, that's pretty general, right? Most leases do that, but it really does prioritize environmental health and wellness, establishes a sustainability point of contact, which I'll talk a little bit more in just a couple minutes, defines how the building and tenant space are going to operate, and enables the ability to report progress, which is very, very important. There's probably some tenants and landlords on this call that have struggled with data. Utility data is the key to all of this. And it's like, who has the data and who needs the data. So that's a really important piece of the puzzle as well. So where do you start with this, right? You really need to look at your current leasing situation and come up with a strategy that works best for your organization, of course. So for instance, if you're a tenant, do you currently have a standard lease requirement that you take to the landlords? Or if you're a landlord, do you have at least some basic green lease clauses in your standard lease form? If either of you said no, like, start there. And if yes, if you do have some, like, how can you improve upon what you have? You want to at least make sure you have the critical items on the table. So, and you might even think about it like you have some must-haves and some nice-to-haves, right? So like, you must have access to the data, but it's nice to have sub-metering, something like that. I mean, it could be different things, again, depending on your business, depending on your lease type situation and building type and that kind of thing. The nice to haves are the things that will take a little more negotiating, but at the same time, I venture to say that both landlord and tenants have a few things related to this that, really need to be in there in the lease for you. You just need to figure out, again, how you can have that discussion to make it a win-win. And don't forget also that renewals, yes. New leases, yes, of course, but also don't forget about renewals. Particularly, you think about, that BPS map that we were talking about. If you've got a renewal coming up in any of those areas, like, you may want to look at that and think proactively. Is there something you need to amend or add a memo? Because because you have this requirement that's coming down the pike. So in thinking about like what lease clauses are the best to start with, these are very, very basic, but it just, these are the ones that if you don't have these, I suggest this is the place that you start. Number one, the sustainability contact for the tenant and landlord. This is so simple, right? But I tell you, it helps facilitate any discussions along the way. So if either party had any kind of related energy or ESG need, a lot of times, especially, a lot of you are large companies, and if your boots on the ground teams, like maybe they don't really understand what you're doing with renewable energy or what that goal is. They're just trying to, keep moving on the ground. But if you know that something is not really working, you're not able to get something done, or either party has kind of come to a stalemate at that location, that you can have the sustainability contact for the tenant side and for the landlord side, have a discussion. What can we do? Can we do something here that can then filter down to help move things along in that specific location? And I've talked to some people recently where they were grabbing the sustainability contact or the energy contact, or operational, like not everybody has a sustainability department, but whoever that right contact is that you can have an energy or utility conversation with. Could be waste. I know waste is big for retail. I talked to a retail landlord recently that were like, yeah, we've been collecting the sustainability contacts and the leases for years. But you also need to do something with that, like create a database so so it's easy to know like who that is, and also there's turnover, right? So you want to make sure that those contacts stay up to date, but it's really important that you know who to talk to. I also, as a side note, would highly recommend you consider having sustainability contacts at the negotiation table, particularly if you've got things from your side that are super important, but your leasing team or your legal team can't really articulate it in a way that, to help create that win-win outcome. Pull in a sustainability person that can help in that negotiation. Okay, that's enough of that. So also, when you're just getting into a new building or a new space, make sure your fit out space is efficient as possible during that time. Again, both tenant and landlord should be coming to the table here with standards that are very high, related to energy efficiency, indoor air quality, all of those kind of things. So just make sure that if you do have a set of efficiency standards, make sure your teams have maybe taken a review to make sure that it's where it should be in this day and age. Like for instance, if with your current fit out standard, would that be adequate in a building performance policy situation, or would it be enough? So it's something to think about. And of course, during that time when money is being spent, when there's a potential TA allowance and that sort of thing, it's the most economical, to incorporate into that, into that time when you're moving into the space. Data transparency, as I discussed earlier, utility data is the key to building performance. So if you control the data as the tenant, you should be willing to share the data with the landlord. Or, if they ask on a periodic basis, it's very easily done through Energy Star Portfolio Manager. Again, you can always email me, ask me questions about that if you don't know what I'm talking about there. Or if the landlord controls the data, maybe as a tenant, you want to try to submeter your space, or at a minimum, have the landlord share the actual consumption with you. Even if it's pro rata, you still need some consumption numbers for your own, data tracking. So just figuring out again what the situation is and how you can enable both parties to do the reporting that they need to do on that data. And then just as a bonus tip, if you do have any locations in a BPS jurisdiction, there could be steep fines. So just make sure, again, that you and your landlord have discussed who's going to be responsible for what, including any associated fines, how you're going to work together on the performance of that space. And then another just sort of final tip, just be open. On the tenant side, be open to those cost recovery clauses that the landlord may put in the lease. And as a landlord, make sure that you have a good amortization plan that works out well for the tenant. Again, very much a win-win scenario there. Okay, so those are some basic clauses. So just to quickly look about, well, what does that mean? You know, I keep talking about win-win outcomes. So again, the point of contact, it is what a win-win, right? Because, you know, you just need that in there so people can have conversations. We just talked about data transparency. You know, the tenant will provide the utility data, or the landlord will provide the Energy Star score, or the pro rata data, or whatever the consumption data is. Tenants will be willing to pay for the sub-metering of their space if needed. Landlord will have the ability for the tenant to sub-meter. Again, if you are in a situation where you can't determine your own, and I know some closed malls, it's very difficult, but is there some way to do it? CapEx, we were talking about that, and energy efficiency pass-through. So again, you know, tenants accept a pass-through as long as there's not like a large increase for you. And then landlords like amortize that cost and pass it through in a fair way. And the other thing that I just want to make a point about in the CapEx, and I would love to hear stories from you all, because you all have probably figured out many ways to get this done to where it is a win-win. So for instance, on the tenant side, if there's a project that you're working with your landlord on that you'd really like to have renewable energy for your space or something, you know, or a system replacement or some addition, you know, maybe the landlord would be willing to cover more of the cost if you extend your lease term or renew early or something like that. So again, think outside of the box for ways that you can make it work as a benefit for both parties. And then just understand too, the last bullet, that again, between landlords and tenants, either party can have aggressive carbon goals these days because of all those market drivers we were talking about. So just be willing to accept or set and think about how those go into your lease and how you can come together to create those viable solutions. I did quickly want to talk about performance-based leasing. So I went over those parameters of just the basic green lease. And this is especially for those of you who have already done the green leasing. Like we do have that parameter up there of that percentage of people that have, you know, made some good progress. There's kind of a 2.0, and again, because of these market drivers, because of things like net zero goals and BPS requirements. These are strict requirements on a building, right? So tenants and landlords can't necessarily do things the way they've always done them if you're going to be net zero or BPS compliant. So this concept of a performance-based lease takes it to the next level. So again, if you're in New York, Boston, some of these other cities, or if you've got it coming, again, you're going to want to look at some of these lease clause examples. We have a lot of information on our website. It takes it to the next level. It sets actual performance targets in the lease. It says the landlord will be responsible for X, the tenant will be responsible for X, and there's accountability for both. It's a fairly new concept, but it is definitely where the lease negotiations are going because of, again, the market drivers. So, and I'll provide a resource for you at the end, so you can go to get lots of performance-based leasing information, as well as sample clauses, if that's something that applies to your organization. And I do just want to quickly mention, for those of you who do have green leasing in place, we want to make sure you're aware of the Green Lease Leaders program, because this is a program that IMT and the Department of Energy have ran together since 2014. It really spotlights those companies that meet green leasing standards. We provide technical support. And even if you're just starting out, I highly recommend you go to the Green Lease Leaders website and use the reference guide. We have tenant and landlord reference guides. Those are your roadmaps. Even if you have no intention of applying this year, it's okay. Go there, get the roadmap. The roadmap will tell you the important areas, provide sample clauses for you. So it's definitely a reference that you're gonna want to grab. And you know, we're seeing increased retail winners every year. So we do want to make sure that we get more and more retail representation in our Green Lease Leaders program, which is actually a great segue because I'm super excited. We're going to talk with a retail Green Lease leader. So we have Megan Runyon from Ulta joining us today. And I just couldn't be more excited to have her talk about the experience that Ulta has had. I know this is something, again, everybody was interested in who's done this and what's their experience. So Megan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Would you mind just taking a moment just to introduce yourself and your role at Ulta and kind of maybe just a little bit of what's happening in the ESG landscape for Ulta?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see, I'm the manager of energy and sustainability here at Ulta Beauty. I've been here for 4 years now. And in my time at Ulta, I've actually seen the business really increase the focus and resources being put towards ESG overall. And just in the past year, we set our first carbon reduction targets. And so we've been really working towards how we can address that across the organization, and green leasing has been one of those ways.
Nice. Ulta has been a green lease leader actually since 2018. And this most recent cycle, which was this past year, you were awarded gold. So congrats on that. We were very excited about that. So can you tell us how green leasing has actually helped Ulta meet your ESG goals?
Yeah, absolutely. A big way is through managing our utility consumption. In a leased space, you have limited control over the space itself. And so we've been able to advise our landlords on specifications like setting our own utility meters. This gives us the visibility over our consumption and a better ability to therefore control it, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. So having that is key. And then it's also allowed us to do our own reporting. On an annual basis, we do a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. We want to make sure we're accurately accounting for those emissions resulting from our utility consumption. So having that control over the utility meters is key. And then in terms of managing our energy consumption, we've also requested minimum energy efficiency standards in our leased space fit outs. And that allows us to have the most energy efficient store as we can from day one to try to minimize any energy waste. Nice.
That's great. Yeah, data is key, right? Just as I was talking about, it's important. And do you have some of the landlords asking you back to report some of your data back to them if you're sub-metering your space? Because again, landlords are trying to do the same thing, right? Track their own scope 3 emissions and that sort of thing. So are you reporting back to landlords as well?
Absolutely. A lot of our landlords are asking for the utility data so that they can do their own reporting. And so we're happy to share that information.
Yeah. Again, win-win, right? Perfect scenario. So since you guys started this 2018 or even before, can you talk about maybe sort of how you got started and how your lease has evolved over time?
Yeah, so like you said, 2018 was kind of the first year for us to be involved, and that was the year that we implemented a few really impactful changes to our form lease and our leasing policies. And there was really 3 main provisions. One was establishing that sustainability contact, which you talked about earlier, as well as sharing data. So as a tenant, sharing the utility data with our landlord, as well as being able to request the whole building Energy Star scores from our landlords on an annual basis for those that were reporting. And then I think the biggest one was we would permit the landlord to pass through costs for energy efficiency CapEx improvements that would benefit us as a tenant. And that one was definitely the most challenging, I would say, but it played a major role in being able to advance energy efficiency in our stores. our original position was to reject any pass-through of capital costs because, it would be potentially exposing Alta to higher costs on our side that we wanted to avoid. But we looked at it and determined that, ultimately we would benefit from the utility savings resulting from the project, which would, mitigate those costs that were passed through. So that's how we were able to make the case for that.
I love that. I think that's so important. Like it's a little bit of a mind shift, right? And like, you've sort of always done it one way. You sort of always have rejected it, but it's like, oh, wait a minute. Like there's more information, like we can benefit from this. Did you have to do much sort of stakeholder engagement internally on that to like get people to understand that, no, this is actually results in a good thing?
Yeah, definitely. But it really helped to be able to look at it from the perspective of how it's aligning with our own organizational goals related to energy and ESG. And that's how we were able to make that happen.
Nice. Well, and that's a great segue to my next question, which is talking about the challenges. Because I know that probably everybody on here has had some challenges along the way. So like, what are some of the challenges that you guys face in trying to get this done? And maybe some of the, even if you have any sort of, solutions on how you overcame them?
Yeah, some of it was really just adjusting for some incremental workload that we experienced after we implemented some of these changes. All of a sudden we had all these ad hoc requests for energy data, right, from individual sites or individual landlords that our team hadn't had to provide previously. And we were also getting some pushback in terms of getting the entire building Energy Star scores. And so we actually went back and we revised the lease language a little bit to try to make that a little bit smoother, more requiring the landlord to use their best efforts to implement a program that would track those scores, as well as establishing a process for us to provide that data so that it wasn't, a one-off request, but we were able to sort of streamline that and make sure that both we were getting the information we needed, but also the landlords were getting the information they needed.
Yeah, nice. I'm just curious, do you all have anybody on the ESG team that either, takes part in the lease negotiation process or that, directly, that does have involvement in lease provisions that you put in?
Yeah, within our legal team, there is overlap there.
Yeah, nice. What advice would you give to an organization, especially if they're just getting started? Yeah, that, you've been doing it for a while now. So what kind of advice would you give those out there who are trying to get started here?
Yeah, I mean, really take it one step at a time, right? I think, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of tenants and landlords are both, if you haven't already set environmental targets or ESG targets, increasingly we're seeing that both from landlords and tenants. And so being able to engage your landlords, understand where you can align on common goals and where there might be some quick wins in terms of green lease provisions. But also identifying what that cross-functional group is within your organization, right? It's not going to be handled by just your leasing team on, the energy manager. So I was never involved directly in leases, right? And so partnering with, we've got construction, legal, leasing, energy, all of these different groups that had to come to the table to work on this. So figuring out who are the stakeholders in your organization that can work together. And I think lastly, shout out to some folks on the call, but leveraging the resources that are available from organizations. When we were getting started, we really leveraged the Green Lease Leaders resources that were out there to be able to make the case internally to our leadership. But there's RELA, NRF, the Landlord Tenant Energy Partnership. There's great information there, but also it's platforms where you can engage with landlords, but also learn from other retailers and tenants who have, been down this road already and can share some lessons learned and some advice on how they're able to get where they are.
Yeah, I know I'm biased, but I agree with you that because because even before I worked at IMT, I worked on the ownership side, and I worked for a company that we became a green lease leader in 2014, back in the first year. I'm telling you, these are the best resources, and they really do give you that roadmap. And the fact that there's lease clauses in there that you can take them to your legal team as examples and what other people are doing, and then they can help wrap their brains around it, right, to be able to customize for your company. I do want to mention too that Megan and the team at Alta were so gracious to share these insights, and we developed a case study for green lease leaders. It's going to be coming out soon. So keep your eye out for the case study with Alta. That'll be coming out in the weeks ahead. We're super excited about that. Megan, you're awesome. Thank you so much. If you could stay on for a second, I would love, it's time for some questions. So I know some of you might have questions either for me or Megan, but Ella, are there any incoming questions in the chat that we should talk about?
Yeah, there's one question about best practices to introduce green leasing language to an existing lease already in place. So I think that's a great question for Ulta, if you had any existing leases and how you worked to establish green leasing into those.
Yeah, we've really been bringing on renewals and new leases primarily. But certainly as those come up, we're making sure to have those conversations early and make sure we're incorporating them. But also it's just having sort of an open dialogue with our landlords for those guys who do have existing leases has been really important as well. So even if it's not currently in the lease language, that we're having those conversations now, and as those renewals come up, we're making sure it's incorporated.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I was going to just add something similar, like in some scenarios, you might be able to do some kind of from my experiences, no legal team is happy about doing an amendment on a renewal, but if you have the ability to add a memo, or if you don't even have that, as Megan said, at least as part of the renewal, have a discussion. And even if you can come up with some kind of verbal agreement, and like, here's some things that we're going to work on between now and then, and when we the next time that it does make sense to actually put more into the lease, you've at least sort of paved the way. So at a minimum, have a discussion. But if you can get any kind of addendum or memo, or even a pledge, I've heard of some people, which is super interesting, even if you're like in between a lease and there's something going on and your renewal's not for a couple of years, and have the conversations with your landlord or have a conversation with your tenants, and see if there's like kind of just an agreement or a pledge that you guys can agree on to move things forward. Because obviously when you're trying to get some things done, they don't always exactly fall at a lease renewal. But again, a lot of you have large companies, and it takes a while for the leases to roll. But at the same time, as you just start chipping away at it, before you know it, you'll have a lot of the provisions in a lot of your portfolio.
Yeah, great. Another question that's come up is talking about some of that cost recovery clause language that Ulta decided to accept eventually. So in the case that landlords or tenants are paying that fixed common area maintenance cost, or for similar building types that are paying a fixed utility or operating expense cost, what ultimately did you do before accepting the cost recovery clause? Did you have any type of negotiation to work on energy efficiency upgrades, or was that something you just rejected completely until having that cost recovery clause acceptance? So just if you could talk a little bit about what you did before and after as well.
Yeah, and I will say in majority of our service, we do have our own utility meters, and so we have direct visibility and control over our electric and natural gas costs. And so when there's benefits to our consumption, we see that directly on our bills. as opposed to a shared cost when it's impacting our space specifically. So that's really helpful in terms of making the case. Prior to that clause, if it was, we would just flat out reject any pass-through cost. So unless the landlord was willing to take on the full cost of the project, we weren't allowing that pass-through at all. So getting that language in was really key.
Awesome, thank you. And we had another question, but this is more for the building types that don't have Energy Star scores. So Marla, what are similar initiatives that people can undergo if they don't have an Energy Star score available?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would suggest you can still use Portfolio Manager as a tool, even if you can't get a score or a certification. It's still again, it's free, it's user-friendly. You can still have it be a repository. And what you have to do is take like an EUI, right, which is an energy use intensity, which would be your energy usage or kBTU per square foot. And you can still use an EUI similarly as a score. So what I mean by that is Energy Star will tell you like what the median is. And I know sometimes it's, again, if there's a lot of building types available in Portfolio Manager that you can use, but they don't always get a score and they don't always have a certification type to them. But unless you're some sort of manufacturing, there's probably a building type that's close enough sort of to what you're doing. Because again, all you want is just to have a method to gain an understanding of where you are, right? And what I mean by that is like, what's average? Average is here, we're up here, we're using way more than average. So we need to sort of just figure out how to move the needle. Or, hey, look, we're below average. That's probably a pretty good place to be. The other thing is, if you can't get if you're just doing energy use intensity or water use intensity, if you have multiple locations, you can also use it similarly. Like you can plot those, intensity metrics to see like, who's using a lot more and who's using less and what's your internal average, right? So you can still use the intensity metrics similar to the Energy Star score, to help prioritize resources, prioritize your focus, know where your opportunities are. It's not optimal, but it works. So it is something.
Yeah, thank you, Marla. So one of them is, are there any success stories with brands working together to move the needle with a landlord?
Yeah, I mean, another success story that we know about, and hey, if y'all are out there, drop some success stories into the chat too, and share some of your own. But I know there was another one that from a couple of years ago from H&M. So H&M had some really aggressive energy goals, and they're really trying to have their energy from renewable energy. And they worked with their landlords and were able to come up with a great plan to do significant reductions of energy, to use renewable energy across their portfolio. And they also work together with the landlords and with the utility incentives. And from all that, we're able to widely deploy this renewable energy strategy, and they were saving like between $2,000 and $3,000 a year in energy cost across the board in their stores. So again, that was just another kind of success story of tenants and landlords, that in the retail space that work together. And the other thing that I will tell you is that we work with both, right? At IMT, we work with tenants. We've got some very major brands that we're working with to help them with their leases right now. We work with landlords, and I've worked closely with landlords on the retail side for a long time. And I will tell you that, on both sides, there's net zero goals, there's aggressive carbon goals, there's big ESG goals, and there's also like the tenants don't want to do anything, and there's the landlords don't want to do anything. So we got to do some matchmaking to get you all together here. But at the same time, we know it's not every landlord and we know it's not every tenant. But at the same time, it's more and more and more all the time. So I just encourage you to like figure out in your organizations how to start the conversations. Because if you can get started, the other thing too, on the tenant side, look for those landlords that are doing this. Put it in your RFP or your RFIs when you're looking for space. I know in retail that like it's location and sometimes, you know, you want to be in that area and you have less room to, you know, to go all over the place. You kind of want to be in a spot. At the same time, like, put the things that are important to you related to your ESG goals into your RFIs, because there's a bunch of landlords out there that are really doing a great job with it. So, you know, ask for it right from the very beginning. And that'll help you, again, help you find each other.
One last question is talking a little bit about scope 3, so waste reduction and circularity, and if Ulta has any goals around that at all. And then if so, or in general, how does green leasing interact with some of the waste and circularity goals that companies have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's kind of where we're going next, right? So we are in the process of setting targets. We haven't publicly announced anything yet, so I can't get into details, but stay tuned. But yeah, we're definitely starting to look beyond scopes 1 and 2 and scope 3. And we're trying to figure that out. So I guess asking it in a little while, it's definitely a new territory for us, and we're trying to figure out how we can continue to advance our green leasing, as well as that landlord-tenant relationship to, again, address our targets as they're established and align with the landlords to make sure that we can sort of find a common goal to achieve it together. Because like we said, oftentimes there's targets on both sides, right? And so being able to find that win-win arrangement so that we can both be achieving those goals.
Yeah, it's such a good question, because waste is so challenging, right? It's challenging for everybody, and it's especially challenging in retail. So yeah, I'm putting it out there now. Any of you out there, Ulta, anybody else, if you know, landlord tenant, if you guys come up with a good story on how you've been able to come together and come up with some great waste outcomes, please let us know, because we would love to do a case study on that, and maybe a whole webinar on that, because that's just such an important topic, and we really want to share those who are leading the way in this, and you know, give everybody ideas. But I would, yeah, totally agree with Megan that like once you have those conversations, if you can figure out something, get it in the lease if you can. And again, you know, there's got to be a way to figure it out, but it's tough. It's a tough one for sure. All right, we've just got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to close it out. Megan, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. That was so great, and I know they really loved hearing your experiences, so thank you for that. I just want to take a second to circle back and like just review our key takeaways. All right, so just remember, a green lease is about win-win outcomes. We've said it a million times, right? I don't think you'll forget that. But to Megan's point, just start with a few clauses and get some wins. If you're early on, start with those basics we talked about. Don't try to, you know, do it all at once, but at least start somewhere, right? And then you can continue to move forward after that. You won't get 100% of landlords or tenants in this. And this is a barrier sometimes. Like we hear this often of, well, the tenants aren't gonna, or the landlords aren't doing it, so why we even bother? Like, well, 100% of them might, but you know what? 80% of them will. So don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Get in there and do it, because the majority are going to be just fine with it. As I said, use the Green Lease Leaders Reference Guides as a roadmap. And don't forget, those of you who have already started down this journey and you need to start doing more, the performance-based leasing is the place to go. And then also consider applying for Green Lease leaders recognition. We would love to see more and more retail as our green lease leaders. Here are some of the links to some resources that we're going to send out to you. And with that, that's all I've got. And I am going to turn it over to Scott from NRF.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. I am absolutely thrilled with what you guys just shared. So the benchmarking, the idea of regulations kind of popping up, the collaboration though is the piece I love most, because clearly it's increased collaboration across the entire industry. It's the shopping center owners, the landlords, and the tenants collaborating. It's people collaborating across the retail industry. It's people collaborating inside of organizations. So the sustainability people and the leasing people are all on the same page. And what I love most, Marla and Megan, is you guys demonstrated that collaboration on this call. So this call came together because the Institute for Market Transformation reached out to RELA, reached out to NRF, reached out to ICSC. So there was all sorts of collaboration behind the scenes. And that's exactly what it takes to tackle these issues. So Marla, huge thank you to you and your special guest star, Megan from Ulta. So this was great fun. Thank you so much for all you're doing to make the world a better place and the retail industry a better place.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.